It was a dark autumn morning in 1895. My friend, Sherlock Holmes, the famous detective, and I, Dr. Watson, were in the sitting room of our house in Baker Street in London when a telegram arrived. Holmes opened it at once and laughed. I looked quickly across the room at him. "Why are you laughing, Holmes?" I asked. Holmes looked back at me with his cold blue eyes.
"Because this telegram is from my brother Mycroft," he said. "He wants to speak to me at once about Mr. Arthur Cadogan. Do you know this man, Watson?"
"I saw something about him in today's newspaper, but now I can't remember the story," I answered.
"And my brother Mycroft, what do you remember about him?"
asked Holmes with a smile. "Not much," I answered. "I met him once, long ago. Tell me more about him."
"He's a very clever and important man. He works for the government. He knows everything about everything. So why does he want to speak to me? Why does he want to visit our home in Baker Street? And who is Mr. Cadogan?"
I opened the Times and looked for the story. "Here it is," I cried suddenly. "A worker found Cadogan's dead body near Aldgate Station on the London Underground on Tuesday morning."
"Tell me more, Watson," said Holmes.
I began to read the story in the Times to him. The dead man was Mr. Arthur Cadogan. He was 27 years old. He lived with his wife, Violet, in Woolwich, and he worked at Woolwich Arsenal.
"Now I understand," cried Holmes. "Mycroft is interested because Cadogan worked for the government."
"On Monday night," I said, "Cadogan was in Woolwich with his wife. They had tickets for the theatre. Suddenly, he left her in the street. But why? She doesn't know. At 6 o'clock the next morning, a worker found his dead body."
"Near Aldgate Station,"
said Holmes.
"I see. And was Cadogan badly injured?"
"Yes, he was."
"Then he fell from the train, or somebody pushed him. Perhaps he was dead before they pushed him out. Tell me more, Watson."
Cadogan's train came from West London. But where did he get on? "The police don't know," I said. "There was no train ticket in his pockets, only some money, 2 theatre tickets, and some papers."
"Very interesting," said Holmes. "How did he get on the train without a ticket? Perhaps somebody took it. But why?"
Holmes stopped and thought.
Cadogan worked for the government at Woolwich Arsenal. He had some important papers, and my brother Mycroft is interested in this. And so, Watson, I am interested too. Now, where is Mycroft?"
Minutes later, Mycroft Holmes arrived at our door. He was a tall, fat man with a very clever face. With him was our old friend Lestrade, the Scotland Yard detective. Mycroft took off his coat and sat down.
"This is very bad, Sherlock,"
he said.
"The government isn't happy. Do you know the story?"
"Watson read it to me from the Times,"
answered Sherlock.
"What were the papers in Cadogan's pocket?"
"They were plans for a new British submarine, the Bruce Partington submarine. Their top secret. and must always stay in a safe at Woolwich Arsenal.
Then why were they in the pocket of a dead man near Aldgate Station?
Asks Sherlock.
We can't understand it, Mr. Holmes,
Said Lestrade.
And it's worse than that,
Said Mycroft.
There were 10 papers in the safe at Woolwich, but we only found 7 papers in Cadogan's pocket. The 3 most important papers weren't there. Where are they? We don't know.
Said Sherlock.
Why did Cadogan have those papers on him? Where are the missing papers? How did Cadogan die? And why was his dead body near Aldgate Station? Lots of questions, but no answers.
And so we need you, Sherlock,
Said Mycroft. Sherlock looked at his brother and at the police detective.
Tell me more.
He said. Mycroft smiled and answered,
Sir James Walter is responsible for all the papers at Woolwich Arsenal. He's a good man. Most importantly, he has one of the 2 keys to the safe. The plans were there when he left Woolwich at 3 o'clock on Monday afternoon for London. He took his key with him.
Why did he go to London?
Asked Sherlock.
He needed to meet someone from the government. He left the man's London home late that night.
Right. So Sir James didn't help Cadogan take the plans.
Said Sherlock.
Who has the second key to the safe?
Mr. Sidney Johnson,
Answered Mycroft.
He's 40 years old. He lives near Woolwich Arsenal with his wife and 5 children. He first worked for the government when he was a very young man. He doesn't talk much, and people don't like him, but he's a good worker.
And where was Sidney Johnson on Monday evening?
Asked Sherlock.
At home with his wife all evening, he says, and he had his key with him.
Lestrade answered.
Tell me about Cadogan.
Sherlock said.
He began working at Woolwich Arsenal 10 years ago,
Said Mycroft.
He worked with the plans. Johnson didn't.
So Cadogan took the plans from the safe.
Said Sherlock.
Perhaps he wanted to sell them to someone. But how did he get the key to the safe?
And the key to the room. And the key to Woolwich Arsenal, too.
Said Mycroft.
We don't know.
So what do we know?
Asked Sherlock.
First, Cadogan left his wife in the street in Woolwich. Second, he didn't go to the theatre that night. Third, he went to London with the plans. And fourth, he died, perhaps near Aldgate Station. Did he sell the plans in London? Then why did he finish in Aldgate and not back in Woolwich?
He wanted to sell the plans, but he wanted lots of money for them, we think.
Said Lestrade.
There was a fight over the money, and Cadogan died. Then his killer took the 3 most important papers from his pocket.
But then why did Cadogan have tickets for the theatre that night? and no underground train ticket,"
cried Mycroft.
"Sherlock, can you help us?"
Sherlock looked at his brother for some time.
Yes, I can.
He said in the end, and stood up.
This is all most interesting. And now I must find some answers to all those questions. Come, Watson.
Chapter 2. The Body on the Railway Line. An hour later, I stood by a railway line near Aldgate Station with Sherlock Holmes and Lestrade. Underground trains came out of their tunnels near Aldgate, and the railway lines there were open to the sky. An old station worker with a red face spoke to us.
"My name's Mason,"
He said, slowly and carefully.
"and I found the young man's body here. He fell out of a train at about midnight on Monday, we think."
Was there a fight on a train on Monday?
Asked Holmes.
"No,
Answered Mason.
we don't know of any fights, and we never found the young man's train ticket. There were only theatre tickets in his pocket."
Did you find any of the trains with an open door?
Holmes asked.
"No."
Said Mason.
"Will you learn something interesting this morning?"
Said Lestrade.
"Someone in a train from West London heard a noise just before the train came into Aldgate Station. Perhaps it was the noise of Cadogan's dead body when it fell."
Perhaps.
Said Holmes.
But what are those things over there, Mr. Mason?
"Those are points, Mr. Holmes.
Answered Mason.
Many different railway lines meet here, you see."
Suddenly, Holmes was very excited.
Ah, and when trains go over points, they change direction. Very interesting. Now, was there any blood on the railway line under the body when you found it? I don't see any now.
"No, Mr. Holmes, there wasn't."
Said Mason.
But Cadogan was badly injured, we know. So why was there no blood? What do you think, Watson?
I am a doctor, but I had no answer for my friend.
Now I'm very interested, Watson. Come, we must go to Woolwich. Goodbye, Lestrade. And thank you for your help, Mr. Mason.
Said Holmes. He walked away, and I went after him. Lestrade began to say something, but then stopped. He wasn't happy. We took a train to London Bridge Station. Holmes stopped there and wrote a telegram to his brother.
Mycroft, I'm beginning to understand more. Please send me the names and addresses of all foreign agents now in Britain. Sherlock. I need those names, Watson.
Said Holmes.
With them, we can understand more.
I looked at my friend's face. He was now very excited. "So, why did Cadogan die?" I asked him.
Why? I don't know.
Answered Holmes.
But I know something about how he died. He didn't die near Aldgate Station. I know that. He fell from the roof of the train when it moved over those points and changed direction. There was no blood from his body on the railway line because he didn't die there. We must learn what happened in London on Monday night.
So, what do we do next, Holmes? I asked my friend.
First, we need 2 tickets to Woolwich,
He said.
Cadogan had no ticket for his journey because he was dead when he began it. But you and I need tickets.
I brought our tickets back from the ticket office,
There's a train to Woolwich in 10 minutes.
said Holmes. We found our train and got on it. My friend closed his eyes and thought. I looked out of the window at the station. I thought about Cadogan. He came to London from Woolwich on Monday night and never went home again. Then I thought about his wife, Violet. She wanted to go to the theatre with her husband that evening and never saw him again. Suddenly, I felt very angry. We must find Cadogan's killer, Holmes, I cried. We must do it for his wife. Holmes looked at me with his cold blue eyes, but said nothing. Then he closed his eyes again. After some minutes, our train left London Bridge Station. How much did my friend truly understand about Cadogan's death? At Woolwich Station, we got off and waited for a cab. Where are we going now, Holmes? I asked.
We need to visit many people.
He answered.
But first, we must go to the house of Sir James Walter. He's responsible for the submarine plans, or was responsible for them before all this happened. He's a good and important man, my brother tells us. So we must begin with him.
Holmes looked at his watch.
We can't wait any longer,
He said.
I need to talk to Sir James now. Come, Watson.
We walked from the station to Sir James's house. Chapter 3. A Second Death. We soon arrived at Sir James Walter's house by the river. The weather was better now, and the sun came out. A butler opened the door to us.
Can I help you?
He asked,
We'd like to see Sir James Walter.
said Holmes.
I'm Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. Watson.
The butler's face went white.
I'm sorry,
He said,
but Sir James is dead. He died this morning.
Dead?
cried Holmes.
How?
The butler looked at us with his tired eyes.
Please, come in.
He said,
You must speak to Sir James's brother, Colonel Valentine Walter.
We took off our hats and went into the sitting room. Minutes later, a tall man in a black suit came in and sat down. He was about 50 years old, nervous, and he spoke very quickly.
My brother was a good man.
He began.
When the plans disappeared, he felt very bad. He felt responsible, you see, because he had the key to the safe. When this happened, he didn't want to live anymore. He broke down and died.
I'm very sorry, I said,
We wanted to speak to your brother
said Holmes.
because the most important plans are now missing, and we need to find them.
But why did Cadogan do this?
asked Colonel Walter.
And how did he take the plans from the safe at Woolwich Arsenal? My brother couldn't understand it.
And you know nothing about it?
asked Holmes.
Nothing.
Answered the Colonel.
Now, excuse me, but I have many things to do.
Of course, I said. Holmes gave Colonel Walter a long look before we left. In the street, Holmes said,
The Colonel is not a happy man, Watson.
Of course not, I said. His brother died this morning.
That's true, but he didn't tell us everything, I feel.
Next, we went to visit Violet Cadogan. We found her at home in a little house with a nice front garden.
I can't understand it.
She told us in her sitting room.
Arthur loved his country.
Did he need money?
Asked Holmes.
No,
Answered Violet.
the government paid him well.
Then was he worried about something?
Asked Holmes. Violet said nothing for some minutes. But when she spoke, Holmes listened very carefully.
Yes, he was worried about something in the last week of his life.
She said.
I asked him about it, and he told me he was worried about something at work.
Did he say any more?
Holmes asked.
He talked about foreign agents. They were interested in some plans, he said, but I didn't listen very carefully.
So he was worried in the last week of his life, but not before,
Said Holmes.
That's right.
Answered Violet.
And what happened on Monday evening?
Well, we had tickets for the theatre. We left the house at about 7 o'clock, in the fog. We were in a street near Woolwich Arsenal, when Arthur suddenly ran away.
Why?
Asked Holmes.
I don't know.
She answered.
He didn't say a thing. He disappeared into the fog, and I never saw him again. I walked home. On Tuesday morning, someone from Woolwich Arsenal came and asked about Arthur, because he wasn't at work. Then, at 12 o'clock, I heard the news. Arthur was dead.
Holmes looked at me worriedly.
Arthur wasn't a thief.
Violet told us.
He was a good man.
Yes, well, thank you for your help, Mrs. Cadogan.
Said Holmes.
And now we must go.
We left the house and took a cab to Woolwich Arsenal.
Now let's talk to Mr. Sidney Johnson.
Said Holmes. Johnson met us at the Woolwich Arsenal office. He was a tall man with glasses, and he was about 40 years old.
Did you hear about Sir James?
He asked nervously. Yes, we spoke to his brother this morning, I answered.
First Cadogan dies, and now Sir James. What is happening? And why did Cadogan take those plans?
So he took them, you think?
Said Holmes.
Why?
Well, I never thought badly of him before.
Answered Johnson.
But I didn't take those papers, and Sir James didn't take them, so that leaves Cadogan.
Right. And what time did you close the office on Monday?
Asked Holmes.
At 5 o'clock.
Said Johnson.
And the plans were in the safe when I left.
So the thief needed 3 different keys for his work that evening. Am I right?
Yes.
Johnson answered.
The key to Woolwich Arsenal, the key to this office, and the key to the safe.
But Cadogan didn't have any of those keys, and the police found no keys on his body. So how did he take the plans?
Asked Holmes.
I don't know.
Said Johnson.
My keys were with me, and Sir James took his keys to London when he left.
Right. Now, only 7 of the 10 papers were in Cadogan's pockets.
Said Holmes.
3 papers are missing. Can someone make the submarine with those 3 papers?
No.
Johnson answered.
They need all 10 of them, I think.
But the missing papers are the most important.
Said Holmes.
They are.
Said Johnson.
Then we must move fast.
Said Holmes.
Come, Watson.
Chapter 4. Holmes in Kensington. Before we left Woolwich Arsenal, we went into the garden. There was a tree in front of the office window, and Holmes stopped and looked carefully at it.
Someone went up this tree not long ago,
He said. Then, suddenly, my friend got up into the tree.
Aha!
He cried.
You can see everything in the office from here. Perhaps this is important, Watson, but we can learn nothing more here today.
He got down from the tree, and we walked back to Woolwich Station. At the ticket office, we spoke to a young ticket office worker.
I saw Mr. Cadogan on Monday evening.
He told us.
He came here at about 8 o'clock, and I sold him a ticket to London. He was very nervous when he asked for it. He took the 8:15 train to London Bridge.
We thanked the man and took a train back to London. Holmes said nothing on our journey. Back in London, he asked me,
So what did we learn in Woolwich, Watson? Let's think. Cadogan was worried in the last week of his life and very nervous on Monday evening. Why? Perhaps a foreign agent wanted the Bruce Partington plans, but Cadogan didn't want to help him. He left home with his wife on Monday evening for the theatre. He had 2 theatre tickets in his pocket. So why did he disappear? Why did he run away and leave Violet in the street? Perhaps he saw the foreign agent again in the fog that night. Cadogan followed the man and saw him take the papers from the safe at Woolwich Arsenal. Perhaps from the tree by the window.
But he didn't call for help, I said. Why was that?
A good question, Watson,
Answered Holmes.
Perhaps the thief wasn't a foreign agent, but someone important from Woolwich Arsenal. Perhaps the important man escaped, and Cadogan took a train to London because he knew his address. What happened next? I don't know. But some hours later, Mason found Cadogan's dead body on the underground railway line near Aldgate Station.
Back at Baker Street, we found a message from Mycroft. It gave the names and addresses of the important foreign agents in London at the time.
Holmes, I have 3 names for you. Wolfgang Mayer, 13 Great George Street, Westminster. Louis Larothiere, Camden Mansions, Notting Hill. Hugo Oberstein, 13 Caulfield Gardens, Kensington. Oberstein was in London on Monday, but he left the next day. The government is very worried. Mycroft.
Holmes looked at his big map of London and found the 3 addresses on it.
Good,
He said, and smiled.
I must go out now, Watson. Please wait here.
I waited 3 long hours. At about 9 o'clock, a boy arrived with a message from Holmes.
Watson, I'm having dinner at Goldini's Italian restaurant in Kensington. Please come at once. And bring a crowbar, a lamp, and a chisel. S.H.
I took a cab to the restaurant and found Holmes at a table by the window. I sat down with him.
Do you have everything with you?
He asked. Yes, I answered. And nobody in the street saw me with it, because it's all under my coat.
Very good, Watson. Now listen. Cadogan's body didn't fall out of a train, but from the roof of a train. This happened when it went over the points at Aldgate and changed direction. So someone put his body on that train roof. But how?
I couldn't answer. Tell me, Holmes, I said.
Very well. In West London, some of the underground railway lines leave their tunnels and are open to the sky. The back windows of different houses overlook these open railway lines. When a train stops under one of these windows, a man, or perhaps 2 men, can put a body on the roof of it. Trains often stop and wait under the back window of a house here in Kensington. The address is 13 Caulfield Gardens. It's the home of a foreign agent, Mr. Hugo Oberstein. And he left London on Tuesday.
Ah, so you left me at Baker Street for this, I cried.
Yes, Watson. Earlier this evening, I went and looked at the railway line behind 13 Caulfield Gardens. A train stopped there when I arrived, under Oberstein's back window. Oberstein put Cadogan's body on the roof of a train through that window.
But where is Oberstein now? I asked. We need to find him and the Bruce Partington plans.
Oberstein is in Paris,
Holmes answered.
He wants to sell the plans there, and he's asking a lot of money for them.
So what can we do? I asked.
We can break into his house,
Said Holmes.
There's nobody there now, but perhaps there's something interesting in the house. Remember, we know Oberstein killed Cadogan and took the plans. But Oberstein doesn't know about us.
But do we need to break into his house? I asked. "Let's talk to Lestrade about this,"
There's no time, Watson.
said Holmes.
You can wait in the street, but I must get into Oberstein's house tonight.
We got up. Holmes paid, and then we left the restaurant,
Let's walk there.
said Holmes.
It's not far. This is going to be a very interesting visit, I think.
Chapter 5. Messages from Pierrot. We soon arrived at Caulfield Gardens. The houses there were all very big. Holmes brought me to number 13, and we looked at the front door. It was big and heavy. "We can never break in here, Holmes," I said.
You're right.
He answered.
People in the street can see us very easily here, and any of them can call the police in a minute. Let's go down to the basement.
We soon stood by the basement door. "I don't like this, Holmes," I said. "We always work with the police."
Look, we're doing this for our country.
answered Holmes coldly.
Now, give me the crowbar.
Holmes was right, I knew. We had important work that night. I took the crowbar from under my coat and gave it to him. I didn't watch him open the door. I looked up at the street, but saw no police. The door was soon open, and we went into the house. I closed the door behind us, and we went upstairs. Holmes stopped at a window.
Watson, this is it.
He cried. He opened the window, and we looked down at the railway line in front of it.
Was I right?
Holmes asked me. Yes, Holmes, I said. You're always right.
Not always, Watson. But look, they put the body here before they put it on the roof of the train. There's blood on the window. Cadogan's blood.
It was true. I could see the blood on the window.
Let's stay here for a minute or two,
said Holmes. We didn't need to wait long. A train arrived and stopped under our window. It was easy to put a body on the roof from here, I could see. So, Oberstein killed Cadogan and put his dead body out of this window, I cried.
Yes,
Holmes said.
Oberstein is our killer, Watson. And now, what more can we find in his house?
We went from room to room, but found nothing.
Oberstein is cleverer than I thought,
said Holmes.
He took everything to Paris with him.
No! Look! I cried. There's a money box on the table over there. Perhaps there's something in it.
Very good, my friend,
said Holmes.
We don't have the key for it, but give me the chisel, please, Watson.
It took some minutes, but in the end my friend opened the box. There were lots of papers in it, with different pictures of a submarine under the sea, and lots of numbers all over them. Holmes took the papers out of the box. How can these help us? I said.
They can't,
Holmes answered.
But what's this?
There was an envelope in the box, too. Holmes took this out and opened it. There were 4 messages in it.
These are from a newspaper,
said Holmes.
Someone put these messages in the Times, I think. Look, Watson, here's the first one, and this is the second.
Holmes put the messages on the table, and I read them.
Would like to hear from you soon. Happy to pay. Write to me at my address. Piero. Must have all papers. Bring them at once. Can pay you then. Piero. Need papers now. Write to me. Then wait for my message in the newspaper. Piero. Monday night at 9 o'clock. Come to my house. Knock 3 times on door. Happy to pay when I have papers. Piero.
Piero, of course, is Oberstein, I said.
Yes, Watson.
Holmes answered.
But who read these messages? And who came here at 9 o'clock on Monday night? Perhaps this man took the top-secret plans from Woolwich. Let's go. We can't do any more here tonight.
We left the house quietly, and soon found a cab.
To the offices of the Times.
Holmes told the driver. Why there, Holmes? I asked. My friend smiled.
Piero is going to put a 5th message in tomorrow's newspaper, I think,
he said. We were not at the newspaper offices for long. Soon I was back at Baker Street, and in bed. I felt very tired. The next morning, Holmes and I ate breakfast early. Mycroft and Lestrade arrived at 8:30.
Good morning, Mycroft,
said Sherlock.
Good morning, Lestrade. Please, sit down.
Then he told them about our visit to Caulfield Gardens.
So, you broke into the house, Mr. Holmes,
said Lestrade. He wasn't very happy.
Yes, we did, Lestrade. I'm sorry, but we did it for Britain,
Holmes answered.
Well, the police do things differently,
said Lestrade.
You must be careful, Mr. Holmes.
Oh, we were very careful,
said Holmes.
What do you think, Mycroft?
Very good, Sherlock,
Mycroft answered with a big smile.
But what now?
Holmes gave the Times to his brother.
Today's newspaper has a new message from Piero, or Sherlock Holmes, in it,
he said. Mycroft read it to us.
Tonight. Same time, same address. Knock 3 times. Very important. Piero.
Good. So, we're going to Caulfield Gardens tonight. But who's going to visit us there?
Asked Lestrade.
Let's wait and see,
answered Holmes. At 8 o'clock that evening, Holmes and I took a cab to Kensington. We met Mycroft and Lestrade near Caulfield Gardens. We broke into Oberstein's house again and waited. At 9 o'clock, we heard 3 knocks on the heavy front door. Chapter 6. The Top Secret Plans Come Home. Holmes went downstairs in the dark and opened the door.
Come in,
he said. We heard someone come upstairs with him. When they were in the sitting room, Holmes quietly closed the door behind them. I lit the lamp. The man saw us, pushed past Holmes, and began to run away across the room. Suddenly he fell over something and hit his head on the door. He gave a cry, closed his eyes at once, and fell back at our feet.
Sherlock? Who is this?
Asked Mycroft.
Colonel Valentine Walter, Sir James's brother,
answered Sherlock.
You see, Watson, the Colonel didn't tell us everything. I felt it. Do you remember?
I do, I answered, and you were right. I helped Lestrade to put Colonel Walter on a chair. After some minutes, he opened his eyes. He looked nervously at us all.
What's happening?
He asked worriedly.
I wanted to see Mr. Oberstein.
Or Pierrot, perhaps,
said Holmes.
Colonel Walter, we know everything. You took the Bruce Partington plans. You wanted to sell them, and Arthur Cadogan died here.
The Colonel said nothing.
Tell us your story,
said Holmes.
Perhaps it can help.
The Colonel put his head in his hands, but didn't speak.
Then I'm going to tell the story,
said Holmes.
You needed money quickly because you had money troubles. So you made copies of your brother's keys to Woolwich Arsenal, to the office, and to the safe. You wrote to Oberstein, and he put messages in the Times for you. On Monday night, you went to Woolwich Arsenal in the fog. You wanted to take the plans from the safe, but Cadogan saw you in the street and came after you. Perhaps he knew something of your money troubles. At Woolwich Arsenal, he watched you open the safe from a tree in front of the office. You took the papers, left Woolwich, and took a train to London. Cadogan went after you and took the same train. In London, you walked to Kensington, or perhaps you took a cab, and you came to this address, 13 Caulfield Gardens. When Cadogan arrived some minutes later, you killed him.
No,
cried Walter.
I'm not a killer. I took the papers from the safe, it's true, and I came here with them on Monday night. But I didn't kill Cadogan.
Then what happened?
Asked Holmes.
How did he die before you put his dead body on the roof of a train?
Colonel Walter was now happy to tell us everything.
Yes, I had money troubles, and Cadogan knew about them. You were right there, Mr. Holmes. I came here to Caulfield Gardens, and I knocked 3 times on the front door. When Oberstein opened the door, Cadogan arrived. He was very angry. He understood everything. He came into the house after me, and Oberstein suddenly hit him over the head with a big, heavy stick. Cadogan fell at our feet, dead. But what could we do with the body? Oh, we didn't know. Then Oberstein remembered something.
Trains often stop on the railway line under my back window, so let's put the body on the roof of a train,
he said.
But first, I want to see those top-secret plans from Woolwich Arsenal. Give them to me.
I gave him the papers. He looked through them and said,
I need to take these 3 papers from you.
You can't, I answered. You must copy them. Then I can take all 10 papers back to Woolwich and put them in the safe again. Nobody must know of this. Oberstein said,
Look, I can't copy these 3 papers because they're very detailed.
Then I must take them with me tonight, I told him. Oberstein thought for a minute and said,
No, I'm going to keep these 3 papers, and we're going to put those 7 papers in this young man's pocket. When the police find the plans on his body, he's going to be the thief in their eyes.
I wasn't happy about this, but I said yes to it. What could I do? We waited for half an hour at the window before a train stopped. We quickly put Cadogan on the roof of it. There was a lot of fog, so nobody saw us. Then I left this house and went home to Woolwich. I never saw Oberstein again.
Holmes looked at Colonel Walter coldly.
And what about your brother, Sir James Walter?
He asked. The Colonel's eyes were suddenly old and tired.
He saw me with his keys once, some weeks ago, and he knew about my money troubles. With my copies of his keys, I went and took those plans for Oberstein. Did my brother know about that too? Perhaps. But he never spoke to me about it. James was a very good man, Mr. Holmes, and this broke him. He died soon after.
Nobody spoke for some minutes. Then Mycroft said,
Colonel Walter, you must help us. We need to find Oberstein. Where is he? Do you know? In France,
answered the Colonel.
I have the address of a hotel in Paris. Oberstein gave it to me before he left. I could write to him there when I needed, he said.
Then you must write to him now,
said Holmes.
and he must come back to London. Are you going to help us?
I am,
answered Colonel Walter.
I didn't plan Cadogan's death, you know. I needed money badly. That was all.
Then take this pen and write,
said Holmes. He gave a pen and paper to the Colonel, and began to speak.
Oberstein, my friend, you need a fourth paper, you know. I now have a copy of it, and I want more money from you for this. I cannot come to France because people are watching me. So please bring the money to the Charing Cross Hotel in London at 11 o'clock on Saturday morning. I can give you the fourth paper then.
Very clever, Mr. Holmes,
said Lestrade.
On Saturday morning, we're going to get our man.
For once, Lestrade was right. Oberstein came back to London after he read Colonel Walter's letter. He arrived at the Charing Cross Hotel on Saturday morning. The Colonel wasn't there, but Lestrade and 3 big young men from the London police were. Oberstein couldn't escape. Lestrade arrested him, and he found all 3 of the missing papers in his bag. Soon after that, Oberstein went to prison. He stayed there for 15 years, and when he came out of prison, he left Britain and never came back. Colonel Walter went to prison too, and he died there 6 months later. He felt responsible for Cadogan's death, and for his brother's death too, and he couldn't live with that. Mycroft thanked Sherlock and me for our work. Then he disappeared from our lives again for a very long time. The next year, on a beautiful spring morning, Sherlock Holmes went to Buckingham Palace and met the Queen there. She thanked him for his clever detective work, and they spoke for some time. Before Holmes left the palace, the Queen gave him a beautiful tie-pin. So when he wears that tie-pin now, perhaps he thinks back to the dark autumn of 1895 and our work for Mycroft and the British government.
How could he forget the top-secret Bruce Partington submarine plans and their journey out of Britain for a time before they came back home again?
Dominoes. Level 1. Sherlock Holmes. The Speckled Band by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Adapted by Leslie Thompson. Read by Rupert Farley, Julie Maisie, Roger May, and Paul Panting. Published and copyright Oxford University Press 2015. Chapter 1. Before Her Wedding. It is 1883 in London, and we are at 221B Baker Street. Sherlock Holmes is at home with his good friend, Dr. Watson. Mrs. Hudson, the servant, comes into the room.
Mr. Holmes,
She says,
there is a young woman at the door. She wants to see you.
Of course.
Holmes says. A woman of about 30 walks into the room. Her hair is beginning to go white, and her face is older than her years.
Please, sit down.
Holmes says.
Are you cold? Would you like a hot drink?
I'm not cold.
The woman answers.
I'm tired, and I'm afraid. Oh, Mr. Holmes, can you help me? I can't give you any money now, but in 6 weeks I marry. After that, I can give you money for your work.
It doesn't matter about that now.
Holmes smiles.
Now sit down and tell me your story.
My name is Helen Stoner, and I live with my stepfather. His name is Dr. Grimsby Roylott.
Ah, yes, the Roylotts of Stoke Moran.
Holmes says.
I know them. They are an old, important family.
They aren't very important now.
Helen says.
They have the big old house at Stoke Moran, it's true, but it needs a lot of work. My stepfather lives on my mother's money. She is dead, and my poor sister is dead too.
Your sister?
Holmes asks.
Yes, my sister Julia.
Holmes thinks for a minute.
Now I remember the story of that family. Grimsby Roylott goes to India, and he's an important doctor in Calcutta for many years. He marries a woman with 2 young children. One day, there is a robbery in his house. Roylott is angry with one of his servants. He hits him, and the man dies. Roylott is in prison in India for a long time. When he comes out, he cannot work, and he goes back to England with his family. His wife dies when her daughters are 2 years old. The little girls go to live with their stepfather at his family's old house. The family live happily for some years. Miss Stoner, why are you afraid?
Holmes asks.
My stepfather is a different man now, a very unhappy man. He is always angry, and everybody is afraid of him, not only me. His only friends are the gypsies. They sleep near the house. He sometimes goes away with them for many weeks. When he comes back, he doesn't speak for days. He brings animals from India, and he puts them in the garden. A cheetah and a baboon are living there now. Nobody wants to visit us. It's terrible.
So you are alone with your stepfather?
Holmes says quietly.
Yes, Julia is dead. Dead for 2 years. And only 2 weeks before her wedding.
Helen says sadly.
I want to talk to you about her, Mr. Holmes. I can't stop thinking about her death these days. I feel very alone in that big house. My days are long, and I can't sleep at night because I see her poor face.
Holmes looks carefully at the young woman.
Tell me about your sister's death, Miss Stoner,
he says. Chapter 2. The Old House.
I remember everything very well.
Miss Stoner says.
Imagine that big old house. Our bedrooms are on the ground floor. The first bedroom is Dr. Roylett's, the second is Julia's, and the third is my room. All 3 have doors to the corridor, and their windows look over the garden. That terrible night, Julia is in my room. She can't sleep because Dr. Roylett is in his room and, as usual, he has his Indian incense. Julia can smell the incense from her room, and she doesn't like it. Julia is going to marry soon, and we are talking about the wedding. I am happy for her, but I don't want to be alone at Stoke Moran. At 11 o'clock, before she goes to bed, she asks me a question. Helen, do you ever hear a whistling noise at night? I sometimes hear it at 3 o'clock in the morning. Perhaps it comes from the next room or from the garden. No, I say, but I usually sleep better than you. It's nothing, Julia. Forget about it. Good night, my dear. That night is different, and I don't sleep well. I feel ill, and I can hear the rain against my window. At 3 in the morning, there is a terrible cry. It's my sister! I run from my room into the corridor. I hear a whistling noise, and then a metallic noise. Julia is standing at the door of her room. Her face is white and very afraid. I run to her, and I take her in my arms. She cries, "Helen! It's the band! The speckled band!" They are her last words. I call for my stepfather, and he runs out of his room. He gives her water and calls for the doctor, but nothing can help Julia. My poor sister dies soon after that. The police don't find any marks on her body. Oh, Mr. Holmes, her death is very, very strange.
And what do you think, Miss Stoner?
Holmes asks.
I don't know. Perhaps the gypsies are the speckled band. But our windows have bars on them because Dr. Roylett is afraid of robberies. Every night we lock our doors. Nobody can go into our rooms. I am here with you now, Mr. Holmes, because 2 years after Julia's death, strange things are happening again. A dear friend, Percy Armitage, wants to marry me. My stepfather is not against the wedding. Some men are working in the house, so I am sleeping in Julia's old room. I often sleep badly because I think a lot about my sister. Imagine my feelings at 3 o'clock this morning when I hear a strange whistling noise. I get up quickly and light the lamp, but there is nothing in the room. After that, I can't sleep. So I take the train to London, and here I am.
I want to go to Stoke Moran today,
Holmes says.
I must see the house. Is this a good time?
Miss Stoner smiles.
Yes, my stepfather is in London all day. I am going back home on the 12 o'clock train, so I can see you there this afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I feel much better now.
Chapter 3. Dr. Grimsby Roylott.
What do you think of all this, Watson?
Holmes asks.
It's very strange, Holmes. On the night of her death, Julia is alone in her room. Her sister tells us. There is only one door, and it goes into the corridor. The sisters always lock their doors. There is a window and a chimney, but they have bars on them. How can anyone get in?
Yes,
Holmes says.
and we must remember the strange whistling, the metallic noise, and Julia's last words. Can the gypsies be guilty? They sometimes wear bands around their heads, and those bands have speckles or marks on them.
A band is also a number of people,
Watson says quietly.
That's true,
Holmes says.
Roylott is very friendly with the gypsies. He also loses money when his stepdaughters marry. That's important.
Helen speaks of a metallic noise. Is it perhaps the noise of something against the metal bars on the window?
Watson asks.
I don't know, but we need to see those bedrooms quickly.
Holmes says. Just then, the door opens suddenly, and a very big man comes quickly into the room. He is wearing a tall black hat, and he has a cane in his hand. His big face is red with the sun, and he looks very angry.
"Which of you is Holmes?"
he asks angrily.
That is my name, sir.
Holmes answers quietly.
But who are you?
"I am Dr. Grimsby Roylott of Stoke Moran."
The big man answers.
Are you? Then please sit down.
Holmes says.
"No!
Roylott cries.
I want to know about my stepdaughter. What is she saying about me?"
She isn't saying anything.
Holmes says.
"Don't play with me, sir."
Roylott cries angrily.
"I'm an important man. I know about Miss Stoner, and I know all about you."
Holmes smiles.
That's interesting, but I must work now, and you must leave. Please close the door after you.
Roylott does not leave. He walks to the chimney and takes the metal poker in his hands. He bends it quickly with his two big hands. Then he throws it down at his feet.
"I'm leaving because I want to leave, not because you tell me,"
he cries angrily.
"Be careful, Mr. Holmes."
Then he walks out of the room, looking all the time at Holmes.
My poor poker.
Holmes says quietly, walking to the chimney. He is not a big man, but he takes the poker and quickly unbends it again. Watson's mouth opens, and Holmes begins to laugh.
I'm not afraid of Roylott, Watson. But I need to know something about his wife's will. I'm going out now.
At 1 o'clock, Holmes comes back, and he looks much happier. He has a paper in his hand with numbers on it.
Look, Watson. This is the money from the dead wife's will. It's about £750 in today's money. £250 goes to Julia, and £250 to Helen when they marry. That leaves very little for Dr. Roylott. Is he our killer? We must move quickly. Helen is right to be afraid of her stepfather.
Holmes and Watson go to Waterloo. They take a train to Leatherhead, and from there they go by trap through the country. After a few miles, Holmes suddenly looks through the trees, and he cries excitedly to his friend.
There it is, Watson. Do you see it?
Chapter 4. The Bedrooms. On a hill, the two men can see a big, old house.
Is it Stoke Moran?
Asks Watson. The driver of the trap answers him.
Yes, sir. That's Stoke Moran, the house of Dr. Grimsby Roylott.
We can walk from here.
Holmes says, and he gets down from the trap. A minute later, the two men meet Helen Stoner coming from the house. She is happy to see them, but when she learns about Roylott's visit, her face changes.
My stepfather knows about my visit to you. Oh, no.
She cries.
Don't be afraid.
Holmes says,
We are going to help you. From now, you must be very careful. And you must lock your door at all times. Now, take us to the house.
They arrive at the big house. Holmes looks carefully at the windows to the bedrooms on the ground floor. He looks at Helen's bedroom and the latest work there.
Is this work on your bedroom important?
He asks Helen.
No, it isn't.
Helen answers.
I don't understand it.
Let's look at the bars on your window,
says Holmes. He takes out his knife.
Perhaps I can open them.
He puts his knife to the bars, but they don't move.
No, I can't open them. Nobody can get in through here.
Next, Holmes goes into Julia's bedroom. He looks slowly at everything. It is a little room without much furniture. Over the bed, there is a long bell rope.
Which room can you call with the bell rope?
Holmes asks Helen.
It looks newer than the other things.
I don't know,
says Helen.
I never need it.
Holmes takes the bell rope in his hand and pulls it. Nothing happens.
This bell rope doesn't go anywhere.
Holmes says excitedly.
Now that's interesting. Look, it begins here, just over the small opening of the ventilator.
What a strange thing!
Helen cries.
Yes.
Holmes says. He looks carefully at the ventilator.
This is also new, and it goes through to the next room. Why?
Holmes, Watson and Helen go into Dr. Roylott's room. It is bigger than Julia's room, with more furniture and a big metal safe. Holmes pulls the door of the safe, but it doesn't open.
What's in here?
Holmes asks.
My stepfather's papers.
Helen answers. Holmes smiles.
Is there perhaps a cat in there too?
Of course not.
Helen answers.
Why do you ask?
I ask because there's some milk on the safe.
Holmes says.
No, we don't have a cat. We have a cheetah and a baboon, of course.
Holmes says.
That's very little milk for a cheetah. Oh, what's this?
He walks to the bed. On it, there is a long dog lead.
What do you think of that, Watson?
Holmes asks.
Well,
Watson says.
it isn't an unusual dog lead. But why is it in a loop like that?
Holmes's face is dark.
Let's go out into the garden.
He says.
I must think.
Holmes walks up and down the garden for some minutes. Finally, he looks at Helen and he says,
You must listen carefully. Your life is in my hands.
Yes, Mr. Holmes.
Your stepfather is coming home soon. Go to your room. Watson and I are going to the village inn over there. When Roylott goes to bed, light a lamp and put it in your window. We can see it from the inn. You must then go back to your old room. Watson and I are going to stay in Julia's room tonight.
You know more about Julia's death than you are saying, I think.
Helen says sadly.
Can't you tell me anything?
No, I need to see more.
Holmes says.
But I hope to know everything very soon. Now, let's move quickly. We haven't much time.
Chapter 5. Danger. Holmes and Watson go to the inn and wait. Soon they see Dr. Roylott driving towards the house in his trap. The big man goes into the house and closes the door behind him. Holmes speaks quietly to his friend.
Do you want to come with me tonight, Watson? You can say no. There is danger in that house.
Watson smiles.
I'm not afraid, Holmes. I want to help.
Thank you, my friend.
Holmes waits for a minute, and then he says,
You know, that ventilator is not a surprise to me.
Why?
Watson asks.
Do you remember Helen's words about her sister? Julia can smell the incense from her room, and she doesn't like it. The smoke from the incense must go through a ventilator from one room to the next.
That's very good, Holmes.
And there's one more thing, Watson.
What's that, Holmes?
There is something strange about Julia's bed. Nobody can move it. It is always in that position. So the bell rope and the ventilator are always in the same position over the bed, too.
I'm beginning to understand now.
Watson cries.
We are talking here about a terrible crime.
Yes, and we are going to see terrible things tonight, I think. Let's sit and talk about happier times for a few hours.
The two men wait. At 11 o'clock, they finally see a light in the window of Julia's room.
That's Helen's lamp.
Holmes says.
Let's go.
Holmes and Watson leave the inn and walk out into the night. They go quickly across the garden towards the house. Suddenly, they see something strange running through the trees.
What's that? A child?
Watson asks, afraid. Holmes laughs quietly.
No, it's a baboon.
He answers.
What a strange family.
The two men take off their shoes and go into Julia's bedroom. Holmes moves the lamp onto the table and looks around the room. He puts his mouth near to Watson's head and he says quietly,
We must sit without light. Roylott can see it through the ventilator. Do not sleep, and have your pistol near.
Holmes sits on the bed. Near him there is a cane and some matches. He puts out the lamp, and finally the room is dark. Chapter 6. The Speckled Band. It is a long, cold night. Night birds call out from time to time. Every 15 minutes, the two men hear the village clock. Suddenly, just after 3 o'clock, they see a light through the ventilator. It soon goes off. But then the men smell oil and hot metal. Someone is lighting a lamp. Nothing happens for half an hour, and then there is a strange hissing noise. When he hears this, Holmes jumps off the bed, lights a match, and begins to hit the bell rope with his cane.
You see it, Watson?
He cries. Watson hears a whistling sound, but he sees nothing, only his friend's white face. Holmes stops hitting the bell rope and looks up at the ventilator. Just then, they hear the most terrible noise. A cry from someone very angry and afraid. The cry goes up, and then, suddenly, it stops.
What is it?
Watson asks.
Take your pistol,
Says Holmes.
We are going into Dr. Roylott's room.
The men walk down the corridor, and Holmes hits Roylott's door with his cane. There is no answer. Holmes opens the door and goes into the room. Watson goes after him, his pistol in his hand. A lamp on the table lights the open door of the metal safe. Dr. Grimsby Roylott is sitting on a chair next to the table. He is wearing long night clothes. The dog lead with the loop is in one hand. His eyes are open and they are looking up. Round his head there is a strange yellow band with brown speckles on it.
It's the speckled band,
says Holmes. Watson walks forward a little, and at that moment the strange yellow band begins to move too. The big head and body of a terrible snake begins to move out of Roylott's hair.
Be careful, Watson. That's the most poisonous snake in India,
Holmes cries.
It can kill a man in 10 seconds. We can do nothing for Roylott. He is dead. We must put the snake in the safe.
Holmes takes the dog lead from the dead man's hand. He throws the loop around the snake's body. Then he throws the hissing snake into the safe and closes the door.
Now, Watson, we must take Miss Stoner away from here. And then we can tell the police everything.
Helen soon hears the sad story, and she goes to stay at a friend's house in Harrow. Weeks later, the police tell her,
We're sorry about your stepfather, Miss Stoner, but snakes are dangerous animals. You can't play with them.
Helen says nothing, but now she knows about her sister's death. The day after Roylott's death, Holmes finishes the story for Dr. Watson, and he answers his friend's questions.
Now we understand Julia's last words, Watson. The poor woman sees the snake for a second before she dies and talks of the speckled band. All the time, the danger is not coming from outside the house. It is coming from inside, from Dr. Grimsby Roylott. He is guilty, not the gypsies. Nobody can get in through the door and window, so the ventilator and the bell rope must be the answer to our terrible crime. The bell rope goes to the bed. Roylott loves his strange animals, so I begin to think perhaps the bell rope is a bridge for a small animal. It goes from his room through the ventilator into Julia's room. The chair in Roylott's room has the marks of feet on it. Roylott stands on it with the snake in his hands, and then he puts the animal through the ventilator. The snake's poison kills quickly. The marks from its mouth are very small, so the police do not find them. Of course, Grimsby must bring the snake back to his room later, and so we have the whistle and the milk. Grimsby teaches his animals well. The metallic noise is the door of the safe closing on the snake. Perhaps the snake doesn't kill on the first night, but sooner or later it must kill, and poor Julia must die. On the night of Grimsby's death, I hear the hiss of the snake. I light a match and quickly hit the animal.
Then it goes through the ventilator,
Watson says,
and kills Dr. Roylott.
That's right.
Holmes says.
Grimsby's animal finally kills its teacher. Am I also Grimsby's killer, Watson? Perhaps I am, but I don't feel very bad about it. I'm going to sleep well tonight, my friend.
Me too.
Watson smiles.
One day in the fall of last year, I visited Sherlock Holmes at 221B Baker Street. He was in his room talking to a man with bright red hair. "Oh, you are busy. I will come later then," I said. "No, please stay, my friend," replied Holmes. "I am working on a very interesting case. It is perhaps the most exciting case I have had in months." Holmes sat down and put the tips of his fingers together. He always did that when he was thinking hard. "This gentleman is Mr. Jabez Wilson. He only just started telling me his story," said my friend. "Mr. Wilson, this is my friend Dr. Watson. He has helped me with many cases in the past. Please repeat your story for him." "It all started with an advertisement," said Mr. Wilson. He took out a newspaper and showed it to me. This is what it said. "The Red-Headed League is offering a job to a red-headed man older than 21. The salary is £4 a week. The tasks are extremely simple. If you wish to apply, come to the office of the League on Fleet Street on Monday." I read the advertisement twice. "What an unusual offer," I said in surprise. "Just as I said," smiled Holmes. "Now, Mr. Wilson, tell us about yourself." Jabez Wilson owned a small business. It wasn't going very well. He used to keep 2 assistants, but now he could only pay 1. And even that assistant worked for half the average salary. "You are very lucky," said Holmes. "People don't often agree to work for little money." "My assistant, Vincent Spaulding, didn't have much experience. He is still learning, so I can pay him less," replied Mr. Wilson. "He is certainly not perfect. For example, he likes taking pictures and spends too much time in the basement. He has built himself an actual lab for developing pictures there. But in general, he is a very good worker." One day, Vincent Spaulding brought the newspaper with the strange advertisement to show to Mr. Wilson. "I wish I had red hair," he said. "I found an amazing job offer in the paper, but it is only for red-headed men." Mr. Wilson was surprised. He knew nothing about the Red-Headed League. According to his assistant, the organization belonged to an American millionaire. His hair was red, and he cared a lot about other red-headed people. When he died, he left his money to the League. The organization used it to support red-headed people all over the world. Spaulding offered Mr. Wilson to apply for the job. Mr. Wilson's business wasn't doing well, and he decided to try it out. When he arrived on Fleet Street on Monday, he saw a huge crowd of men outside. All of them had red hair, but Mr. Wilson's hair was the brightest of all. He saw people going in and out of the house. Those that were leaving looked sad. "When I saw how many people there were, I lost all hope," said Mr. Wilson to us. But Mr. Spaulding pushed through the crowd, and soon we were in the office. A red-headed man greeted Mr. Wilson. His name was Duncan Ross. He really liked Mr. Wilson's hair color. "I need to check just one thing," said Mr. Ross. He pulled at Mr. Wilson's hair to make sure it was real. Then he said, "Mr. Wilson, you are perfect for the job. When can you start?" "It depends on the schedule," replied Mr. Wilson. "You will have to be here from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. You must not leave the building during this time. If you do, I will fire you immediately. As for your task, you will have to copy the Encyclopedia Britannica. We will give you a desk, but you have to bring your own ink and pen." Mr. Wilson felt that something was not right. Perhaps this whole thing is a fraud, he thought. But who needs it? It makes no sense. For 2 months, Mr. Wilson copied the encyclopedia. Everything was going well, and he received his money on time. One morning, however, the office was closed when he came. There was a little square of paper on the door that said, "The Red-Headed League has been closed. October 9th, 1890. "October 9th is today," said Holmes. He looked at Mr. Wilson, then at me, and we both laughed. "If all you can do is laugh at me, I will go somewhere else," said Mr. Wilson angrily. "No, sorry, it is just a very unusual situation," replied my friend. "What did you do today before coming here?" "I talked to the owner of the house on Fleet Street."
Do you want to listen to English books and have translations of the new words? Try appewa.com. You can read English stories and learn new words at the same time.
"He didn't know anything about the League, and he didn't know anyone by the name of Duncan Ross," cried our visitor. "The only red-headed man he knew was Mr. William Morris, but he moved out. No one knew where he was anymore. I asked my assistant for advice, but he couldn't help me, so I came here. I don't want to lose such a great job." "It was a good decision," said Holmes. "I think the problem is deeper than we realize. But tell me, how did you find your assistant? What does he look like?" "He answered my advertisement. I chose him because it was the cheapest option. He is a small man, and he has a little white mark between his eyes." Holmes looked extremely excited. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson," he said. "Today is Saturday. I should have the answer by Monday or earlier. You may go now." When Jabez Wilson left, Holmes asked me not to talk to him for an hour. He sat in his chair and smoked with his eyes closed. Finally, he stood up. "I need to visit someone. If you aren't too busy, you can come with me." I agreed. We took the metro to Wilson's office. Holmes knocked on the door. A small young man answered. It was his assistant. "I just wanted to ask you the way to the Strand," said Holmes politely. "Go straight ahead and take the 4th turn to the left," replied the assistant, and quickly shut the door. "I have met Mr. Wilson's assistant before. He is likely the 4th smartest man in London," said Holmes. "Why did you want to see him?" I asked. "I wanted to look at his pants," he replied. "Now let's look around." The street was full of different shops and businesses. A bank stood across the road. Holmes studied the area for some time, then said, "I see it now, Watson. I am afraid we are dealing with a serious crime. I need your help tonight. Will you be at Baker Street at 10 p.m.? Also, take your gun in case there is any danger." Although I am not the stupidest person, I felt completely lost. Why did I need a gun? How did Holmes know the situation was serious? My mind was full of questions, but I was certain that my friend knew what he was doing. That night, at 221B Baker Street, I found Holmes in the company of 2 other men. One of them was Mr. Jones, a Scotland Yard police officer. The other one was Mr. Merriweather, a bank director. "I miss interesting cases," said Mr. Jones. "My job has become boring." "Then today is your lucky day," said Holmes. "I will introduce you to John Clay. He is a successful and dangerous criminal, a thief and a killer. Scotland Yard hasn't been able to catch him yet, but tonight you will have the chance to do it." Mr. Jones looked excited. We caught a cab and rode to the street where Mr. Wilson's office was. Mr. Merriweather led us into the bank building. We went through many dark halls and finally found ourselves in the basement. "This bank keeps a large amount of French gold," Holmes explained to me. "It lies in this basement. One of the most dangerous criminals in London will try to steal it tonight. We are here to stop him." "The only way out of here is back through the house," added Jones. "We took care of that too. 2 police officers are waiting at the front door." We waited for about an hour. I was extremely nervous the whole time. Finally, we heard a sound. One of the stones on the floor moved. We saw some light. Then a hand pushed the stone further to the side. Then the figure of a man appeared out of the hole. He was carrying a light in his hand. A second man followed him. He had bright red hair. "All clear. Let's go, Archie," said the first man quietly. At that moment, Holmes took a step forward and caught him by the arm. The other man immediately jumped back into the hole. "Here you are, John Clay," said Holmes. "You and your friend have nowhere to hide. 2 men are waiting for him at the door." "I see," said Clay sadly. Mr. Jones took him up the stairs to the police cab. "I don't know how to thank you," said Mr. Merriweather to Holmes. "I am also happy that we caught John Clay. I wanted to do it long ago," replied my friend. Later that morning, we returned to 221B Baker Street. We sat in the living room together, and Holmes explained the matter to me. John Clay invented the story about the Red-Headed League. He used his red-headed friend's help to make it look real. It was a way to make the not-so-clever businessman leave the house for several hours a day. Mr. Wilson's business is small, so Clay wasn't looking for anything in his house. It was something else in the area that interested him. Do you remember that he spent hours in the basement? Well, he wasn't busy developing pictures. He was digging a tunnel to the bank. "I see it now. And why did you want to see his pants?" I asked. "I wanted to look at the knees of his pants. I expected them to be dirty from working on the ground, and they were definitely dirty from the hours of digging. That was how I knew I was right," replied Holmes. "All right, but how did you guess that they were going to do it tonight?" "Because they closed the office. It meant that their work was complete. They needed to act quickly, or someone could discover the tunnel. Saturday was the best day to do it because it gave them 2 days to run away." "As always, you did a brilliant job," I said. "It saved me from another boring day," replied my friend. "As one French writer once said, a man is nothing. His work is everything."